Greetings, everyone. Dr. Anita Stewart McCafferty here. Excited to walk you through Module 3 of EDU 679, Supervision and Evaluation of Teachers. Module 3, we will continue our work around mini observations and aligning what we're observing for teacher moves and student learning evidence with Kim Marshall's rubrics. We're also going to be doing a deep dive into effective feedback. So thinking about when we're engaged in observing teachers, then how do we engage in feedback dialogue following those observations? So really thinking about that dialogue, having meaningful conversations that help to push educators forward with their next steps in order to up their game so that they can improve learning for all of their students. And so I want to just walk you through our 4 guiding questions for this week. 3 of those guiding questions are going to feel familiar to you because they have just nuanced shifts, but they are ultimately kind of the same bigger questions. So the first one is that question around how do we determine what effective or good teaching looks like? And in last week's module, we used the in-task standards, that set of national standards, those 10 standards, to help guide our thinking around what does good teaching look like. So the in-task standards is one way of answering that question. This week, we are going to use Kim Marshall's rubrics, and there are 6 of those rubrics, so 6 categories, and that's his answer based on his experiences and the resources that he is using, such as from the What Works and from Marzano and from InTask and a number of other places to pull together his understanding of what makes for effective teaching. The second guiding question is, what are the benefits and challenges of using various observation tools and standards of practice? So for observation tools, there's really a lot of districts over the past decade in particular that started using evaluative tools every time they went into an observation. So they would use a tool that ended with a rating or a score. And so that's one whole set of tools. What we're going to be practicing, at least initially here as we move through the course, are tools that really are much more formative in nature. So by design, they leave out a score or a rating for that observation, and instead focus on looking at the standards of practice, gathering data and evidence. So last week you used a tool called Praise, Probe, and Polish. And it was really just designed from my perspective. When I started working with it, I started working with it for mentoring teachers and then supervising those that were within my department and grade level teams, and then moved on as an administrator to use this tool. And so it was really designed to have excellent formative feedback conversations. So to give success feedback relative to criteria, and then next step, sort of to help push the thinking, that probe and those suggestions of polish, but really designed for dialogue. So you're gonna have the opportunity this week to try out either Praise, Probe, and Polish again, or a couple of observation tools that I have designed aligned to the Marshall rubrics, and then another tool, which is really, again, for formative feedback, and it's designed around 4 questions. So it asks you, what's the content that you're witnessing, observing, being taught? What set of standards or learning targets is it aligned to? The third is, what strategies, what instructional or assessment strategies are you observing? And then the 4th is, okay, so what's the impact? So what's the impact of the content that the teacher is teaching aligned to those standards using these strategies or techniques with those particular students? How's it working? Who's benefiting from the teaching and learning? Who's not? right? So it's really designed to get at the impact, the conversation, to guide the conversation to impact. So that guiding question, that part that's saying, so what are the benefits and challenges of using various observation tools? We're going to make sure that during this course, you have the opportunity to try out a number of tools. So you really get a feel for what works in which situations for which purposes. Then the other part of that question is the standards of practice. So again, last week you used the INTAS standards. This week you're going to try out the Marshall rubrics. In following weeks, you'll be trying out Danielson and Marzano, and we'll take a look at National Board and Maine Schools for Excellence. You have been looking at, hopefully, at your own district or school standards, and then those of your colleagues. And so we're going to practice with a lot of those, because you never know what district you'll end up in what standards of practice they use. And I want you to feel comfortable. I also want you to be able to say, isn't it interesting? No matter whose framework we're using, we're looking for very similar types of things. We might just be organizing them differently and have different numbers of categories or buckets and different numbers of standard indicators or elements that we're looking for. So the third guiding question is about aligning what we're observing. So aligning classroom observations to agreed upon standards of practice. And again, in this case, it's going to come from Kim Marshall's book, Rethinking Teacher Supervision and Evaluation. So in the appendix, you'll find his teacher rubrics, and I'll show those to you a little bit later in another video that I'll do specifically about this week's observation assignment that you're going to do, your mini observation assignment. And the fourth guiding question is a two-parter, and it's really looking at, okay, so what are the characteristics of effective feedback? And how do we help create school climates where meaningful feedback about our teaching practices is the norm? So that's what we really want to move towards, where we have these open doors and open conversations, regardless if we're a building leader, a mentor for a new teacher, if we're an instructional coach, a team leader, a department head, or just a colleague that is interested in helping to another colleague to improve their practice. So really thinking about how do we open up the doors and have that meaningful conversation where it's actionable. We can take next steps to improve our practices. So the 4 module objectives is to continue the work around identifying teacher moves from classroom instruction and being able to do the second part, which is aligning that observational data from the mini observations to Marshall's rubrics. Then third, we're going to continue our work around developing probing and reflective questions to use in the feedback conferences with the teachers that we observe. And the fourth is to use probe and polish observation forms or other descriptive feedback tools for collecting classroom data and helping to guide our feedback conversations. So this week, we're going to apply what you read last week in chapters 2 through 4 from the Marshall text around mini observations. And you don't have new reading in this text, but I encourage you, for those of you who like to continue reading ahead, we are going to read in order of chapters. So chapter 5 will be next. It's not this week, but you'll see it in module 4. So if you want to get a step ahead, feel free to read there. Your readings and viewings, though, will be from the folder that I have put on Blackboard around effective feedback. So the module 3 reading and multimedia folder has a number of videos for you to watch, reports for you to read, and a couple of websites for you to be able to use and to work through a process that's really thinking about observing and coaching and effective feedback. So that will be the readings that you'll do. You'll be involved in the discussion board for this week is really focused on effective feedback. So after you've had a chance to read and view the videos and examine some of the forms and protocols, and then reflect on your own experiences with feedback, then I'd like for you to engage in posting and dialogue with your colleagues about those practices. So what makes for effective feedback. You know, one of the things I typically talk about is that I see these 3 categories around feedback. And a lot of times we spend either as a teacher thinking about giving feedback to our students, or as a teacher leader, coach, mentor, or building administrator or district administrator giving feedback to our supervisees, right? So we think about how can we get good at giving it, and really giving feedback is only a small part of the whole dynamic around if feedback is going to be effective and meaningful and have any sort of impact. And so it's an idea of how do we give feedback, and how do we help establish climates where people are able to receive, to be in a better place to receive feedback, because that's really important. Because I could give great feedback, but if you don't receive it, then, you know, there's no gain. So without action, feedback being put into action, there's no gain, there's no improvement. So we really have to be able to create these climates and cultures that feel trusting and supportive, so that feedback will more likely be received and put into action. And then the third part of it, so giving feedback, receiving, creating these climates where it can be received, is really ultimately we want our students and we want our teachers and staff to seek feedback. So not just to wait passively for somebody to come into my classroom and give me some good feedback, right? But for me to actively seek it. That's when I start to move as a professional, where I'm not waiting around for somebody else to give me the feedback. I put myself in that place where I'm seeking feedback because I desire to improve. So we're going to practice giving, receiving, and ultimately, how do we start to push that idea of creating these cultures where people are actively seeking out feedback? So that's kind of the work for this weekend, and your assignment will be again around doing a mini observation. And because we really can't get into classrooms, which is normally what you would be doing, you're going to be observing from one of those videos that I put on the list, and then getting really familiar with Marshall's rubrics, and then playing around with other observation and data collection tools, and thinking about then how can you put what you've been reading and discussing around effective feedback into practice. So you'll be able to find a video that I put together around the assignment for the practice classroom video observation, in aligning it to Marshall rubrics. You'll find that in the Module 3 readings and viewings. So make sure that you take a look at that. I'm just going to help create a context around Marshall's rubrics and how then to use some of the observation tools for practice of mini observations. I hope you have a wonderful week of learning. And I do just want to take last week around the widget effect. I mean, oh my goodness, there was so many different types of visuals, from PowerPoints and videos and sketch notes and concept maps and mind maps and Venn diagrams and infographics and a graph, even sets of graphs, and you name it, it was there. And so I really appreciate seeing your creativity and your takeaways expressed in that way. I want to encourage you that the discussion boards are always open for you to create visuals as opposed to just written narratives. So thank you for that. And you can expect to be seeing your feedback from assignments. It's usually running about a week out. So you should expect within a week of when you submit assignments and the discussion boards close to then be receiving both scores and feedback from me. So have a great week of learning, and I look forward to your discussion board and assignment posts. See ya.